Hello everyone. Today on this platform I would like to welcome Dr. Dharmanand. Sir is President-elect for the Indian Rheumatology Association and an eminent member of the Karnataka Rheumatology Association. Today, Sir is with us to give us guidance on preventing infection in COVID era and beyond. Over to you, sir.
See, the current COVID epidemic or pandemic has opened our eyes and changed the way we look at the world. In India, particularly, we have started looking at our servant maids differently, and we have started looking at the migrant workers and their importance. And even in medicine, we have started looking at medicine, patients, hospital, everything differently. So now, for a doctor, every patient is a potential case who can infect us. For the patient, every visit to the hospital can be a source of infection. So there is a lot of uncertainty in this era, and we are all worried about getting an infection and would like to know how to keep ourselves safe. So we will discuss in the next 20-30 minutes the relationship between infection and autoimmune disease, and also I will give you a few tips about how to go about protecting oneself in this pandemic era, which can cause autoimmune disease or contribute to autoimmune disease. Infections are a major source, and environmental pollution and toxins, and nutrition and our diet. Very rarely the vaccines and adjuvants in the vaccine, though it's very minuscule amount, and the state of our gut bacteria. All these things are we can call it as leaky gut or increased intestinal permeability. All these things can contribute to environmental factor, which ultimately pull the triggers, and people end up developing an autoimmune disease. This slide pictorially depicts the multi-pronged relationship between digestive inflammation, environmental toxin, chronic infections, sometimes immune deficiency. If your immune system is weak on one side, it can become overactive on the other side. So there is a complex interplay between multiple factors in the environment. When you have a susceptibility gene, you start developing an autoimmune process. Which autoimmune disease develops in which patient probably depends upon the weak link. If you have certain genes, you have become more prone to develop autoimmune disease X, and if you have another gene, you develop an autoimmune disease Y. And this is a slide which is mainly talks about SLE. SLE is systemic lupus erythematosus, which is a disease very similar to scleroderma and Sjogren syndrome. The complex interplay of infections. The bacterial proteins can look like our own tissues, and antibody response, immune response to these antibodies, these bacteria can produce autoimmune diseases. And some infections can also be protective, like if you have worm infestations are supposed to be protective against some of the autoimmune diseases, and also gut bacteria imbalance. If you have the balance is towards a symbiosis with good bacteria and bad bacteria, balance is very balanced, then the less chance that you will get an autoimmune disease. When there is a dysbiosis, you are more prone to develop autoimmune disease. And the autoimmune disease also makes one to develop infections a little more commonly because of various small subtle immune system defects. So in fact, some of the infections are more common in certain autoimmune diseases. So we discussed that infections can be a trigger for autoimmune disease, and autoimmune disease also can predispose one to infections and add to the problems. Drugs, many of the drugs used in treating autoimmune diseases, including scleroderma, can predispose one for infections. So there is actually a lose-lose situation here for many of our patients. In scleroderma, particularly, there is an evidence for a previous cytomegalovirus infection And cytomegalovirus proteins have a lot of structural similarities to human cells. So there can be a cross talk between the CMV and our body immune system, which can result in autoimmune process. There's a virus called Epstein-Barr virus, which also can precipitate or predispose one to develop scleroderma, and also parvovirus. But not every patient who develops parvovirus develops an autoimmune disease. So there should be a genetic susceptibility, and parvovirus infections or any infections could have happened many years before the patient actually develops an autoimmune disease. So these infections goes into the body, opens out a small valve here or unplugs one small area here. So that starts the process of autoimmunity, which may take years before you develop a clinically obvious disease. So what are doctors doing from the physician side? We are aware that all these things can predispose our patients for infections. And we know that infections are major cause of mortality, even death. And we know that steroids are a biggest culprit. So there is a strong movement amongst the doctors to use less and less steroids. And the current recommendations of steroids is developed very empirically in 70s and 80s. We still follow many of their advice, and now we know that we can do away with much lesser steroid, exposing our patients to less immunosuppression, thereby less chance of getting an infection. And drugs like hydroxychloroquine can have a mild protective effect against some of the infections. You must have been familiar with the current craze about hydroxychloroquine. So after President Trump has advocated hydroxychloroquine as a treatment for COVID, there is a huge shortage of hydroxychloroquine because everybody is taking it, everybody is holding it. But the evidence has been weak, and the current verdict is it is probably not very useful for COVID infections. And to reduce the steroids, we always use steroid sparing drugs so that steroid usage can be reduced still further. And a lot of clinicians are thinking about treating autoimmune disease without steroids. That is called as steroid-free regimens. And what are the strategies to prevent infections? So these are the medical strategies from doctor's side. So doctors would like to educate the patient about the increased risk of infection, and prompt evaluation when the patient has got the earliest evidence of infection. When a patient who is on immunosuppressive develops a mild fever or headaches, unwellness, then we need to quickly evaluate this patient for an active infection, and prompt recognition and treatment can make the patient get better faster. And doctors try to reduce the steroids, keep it to a minimum when there is an infection, and they stop the immunosuppressive drugs to help the body to heal the infection a little faster. And before giving any immunosuppression, some of the biological drugs, doctors screen for latent tuberculosis. Sometimes tuberculosis can be there in our body very silently, and it may not come out at all rest of their lives. And when the body's immune system is suppressed by medications, the tuberculosis can get reactivated and cause symptoms. So tuberculosis can be screened, and if there is evidence of tuberculosis, that can be treated so that the chance that tuberculosis gets reactivated is reduced a lot. And doctors also screen for hepatitis B and C. If these infections can be silently present, they can be reactivated during immunosuppressive therapy. So that it can be prevented if you screen and address it much before. And vaccination is a strategy, and people use pneumococcal vaccine, influenza vaccine, and herpes zoster vaccine, as we will discuss about vaccines a little later. So there are few special situations in scleroderma which can make one little more susceptible for infections. We will discuss this in the next few slides. And lot of scleroderma patients, because of the skin tightness, they have difficulty opening their mouth fully. So that compromises the dental hygiene, and brushing is difficult. And even the dental for the dentist to clean the teeth, it becomes difficult. So these can predispose one for recurrent or serious dental and gum infections. And acid reflux or GERD, gastroesophageal reflux disease, is also very, very common. Because of that, most of the patients are on a proton pump inhibitor, or otherwise called acid suppressing drug. They are very effective in treating the symptoms, help one to sleep better, eat better, live better. But we have to remember that God has given gastric pH in the stomach for various good reasons. So pH of the stomach is always acidic, and that is important for helping digestion. So if the acidity is blocked or reduced by the drugs, the digestive process can be hampered. And also the acid is a natural protective barrier against infection. Even if you take pani puri from your roadside shop, if the bacterial load is not very high, our stomach acid can take care of it and we will not get any infections. But if you are on this type of medications, this bacteria can escape the stomach and can reach the intestine and cause infections. So this may be one of the reasons why some of our patients may be developing higher incidence of gastrointestinal infections. Some of the patients can have reduced gastrointestinal mobility, which can lead to what is called as SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, which can cause severe gastric symptoms like bloating, gas, burping, etc. And our patients are also prone to develop digital ulcers. Sometimes the digital ulcers can get infected and can cause a lot of pain and sometimes digital loss because of the ischemia and infections. And interstitial lung disease or scarring lung disease also is common in scleroderma and many other autoimmune diseases. And when the lung is slightly scarred, even a normal infection can lead to severe respiratory difficulties, because if 20% of the lung is already compromised because of the scar tissue, when you get an infection which affects 30% of your lungs, then patient will struggle for oxygenation, and also the scarring can predispose one for frequent infections. And of course, last but not the least, the medicines which are used to treat these diseases, like immunosuppressives, mycophenolate, cyclophosphamide, azathioprine, also methotrexate, can also contribute to increased risk of infections. So what are the potential solutions? Regular visit to dentist and preventive dental hygiene can be very useful. It may be tough for your dentist to work with a smaller mouth opening, but quite a few dentists take it as a challenge and do it. So regular dental visits every 6 months can be very useful. And also using electronic toothbrush can improve the reach, and also electronic water jet can be used, water floss can be used to clean the teeth and the gums, can be useful. And also physiotherapy for the face can improve the mouth opening. And with regards to acid reflux, most of the patients would require some amount of acid suppressing drug. It can be minimized by using non-drug measures for gastrointestinal reflux disease or GERD, like eating smaller meals, having an early dinner, and giving 3 hours gap between dinner and sleep time, and also elevating your head end of the bed by 6 inches so that there's a slight slope, and the chance that acid will come up to the esophagus and to the throat will be less. And there are also other drugs like pro-motility drugs, which doesn't have acid suppressing property, but which can improve the symptoms. Alginate containing antacids and pro-motility drugs. And SIBO, that is small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, is treated with cyclical antibiotic therapy, and giving all the drugs to prevent digital ulcers can also prevent digital infections. Vaccination, which we'll discuss, can be an important strategy to protect the lungs against life-threatening infections. And many patients also receive what is called as a Ceftriaxone or a Bactrim prophylaxis or cotrimoxazole prophylaxis. This antibiotic given alternate day to prevent some of the serious infections called Pneumocystis carinii infection, which can occur in patients who have interstitial lung disease or a lung disease and are on drugs like cyclophosphamide or mycophenolate or higher dose of steroids. And no discussion is complete without addressing the diet. Can we do anything with the diet to improve our immune system and reduce the chance of getting a major infection? There is no single food item which you take, or if you avoid one food item, you will not get. There is no nothing like that. But vegetables and fruits, which form the cornerstone of an anti-inflammatory diet. So diet can be divided into pro-inflammatory diet and an anti-inflammatory diet. Pro-inflammatory diets are generally processed food, junk food, all the bakery products. All these are processed by man. It's a man-made food. So it's not the God-made food like vegetables and fruits. So if you notice, I have underlined vegetables over fruits. When we say you eat lot of vegetables and fruits, people eat more fruits and less vegetables. Fruits are easy to take and they are sweet, and it satisfies our sweet craving. But vegetables are more important, and fruits can be in large quantity. It's like a sugar only, as if you are eating more sweets, and you can put on weight and also can predispose one to more infections. So not more than 2 to 3 servings of fruits, but lots and lots of vegetables. So what people say is up to 2/3 of your total plate can be vegetables and some fruits. And predominantly plant-based diet, proteins are very important. And there is a small part that animal proteins may predispose people for autoimmune diseases. May not be for infections, but could be due to could be autoimmune diseases. And fat, you should take more omega-3 rich fat like fish oil and some of the olive oil and other oils which contain predominantly walnut contains omega-3 fatty acids. So the balance should be more omega-3 than omega-6 fatty acids. And when you eat carbohydrates, try to eat whole grains, and all your beans, legumes also contain some protein and also some amount of carbohydrates. And when you are eating a chana or a rajma, you are getting carbohydrates, that you should remember. So overall carbohydrate grains we should reduce. And it is very well known that sugar can be immunosuppressive. If you eat 5 spoons of sugar and on the day all your WBCs are very sluggish. WBCs are the essential tools to fight infections. So avoid simple sugars. That means no sweets, no sugar. And tea and green tea can be protective, anti-inflammatory. So also ginger, turmeric, garlic, etc. All our spices are good. And salt also is immunosuppressive. So higher the salt, lesser effective is your immune system, or it can make you more prone to develop autoimmune disease. So people with autoimmune disease should restrict their salt intake to just enough to give a food adequate taste. And also eating patterns and habit also can be important. Chewing the food very well. So if you chew the food very well until the food becomes soft, then the digestive process is facilitated, and it also reduces intestinal permeability or leaky gut. So if you eat in a hurry and eat while on the run, you chew less and bigger particle gets into the stomach. The stomach finds it very difficult to digest, which can read the intestine, and it can lead to intestinal damage and increased permeability. And fasting has got fantastic effect on autoimmune phenomena and immune system, but during fasting, immune system might be slightly suppressed. So we strongly recommend against fasting during an epidemic or a pandemic. So otherwise, it is good for autoimmune diseases. And few words about gut microbiome. And gut microbiome are the bacteria and virus and other microbes which are present in the intestine, particularly large intestine, which has got a huge role in shaping up our immune system. There is a big difference between women and men, and women gut bacteria is supposed to make them little more prone to develop autoimmune diseases. In animal models, when they transplanted male animals fecal flora into female animals, they get less autoimmune diseases. And gut is a source of foreign antigen exposure. So more, because we eat a lot, and food is a foreign protein, so body is exposed to foreign antigens through gut every time we eat, and that is the importance. It has got a huge importance in immune education. So this gut bacteria also plays a role in maintaining intestinal permeability, as discussed earlier. They act as a first barrier against bacteria, bad bacteria, and TH17 promotes autoimmunity. They reduce it. They upregulate T regulatory cells, which have got a dampening effect on autoimmune process. And short chain fatty acids produced by microbiota has anti-inflammatory properties, and they also maintain the tight intestinal junction, reduces the permeability, reduces the chance that unwanted protein enters into the blood circulation. This is a nice picture. When everything is right, you have eat high fiber diet, good bacteria will be better. And vaginal birth introduces kit for mother's bacteria, so they develop good bacteria in their intestine. Breastfeeding can promote, and environmental exposure to microbes, like eating plants freshly plucked, we will end up eating some bacteria which is there in the plant as well, but they are good bacteria. All these things can promote resolution of inflammation and better health and immune system. Opposite, multiple antibiotic exposure, antibiotics in the food, and diet rich in sugar and processed food can all lead to dysbiosis. So more unwanted bacteria will be more than good bacteria, which can lead to autoimmune process and increase susceptibility to many infections. Then we shall move to vaccination. The common vaccines which are used are pneumococcal vaccine and influenza vaccine. Influenza vaccine is given once a year. It used to be trivalent, now it is quadrivalent. Quadrivalent means it has got antigenic material from 4 different strains of influenza, and that is changed every year depending upon what is there in the circulation. If swine flu is there in the circulation, they include swine flu inactivated proteins in the vaccine, so that body produces resistance against antibodies against the circulating swine flu. So that is why we have to take influenza vaccine every year. A pneumococcal vaccine is taken once only, Prevnar 13 once a lifetime, and Pneumovax once or twice, maximum twice in their lifetime. And people also use hepatitis B vaccine. There's a vaccine called zoster vaccine, which is effective against herpes zoster, but which is not available as of yet in India. And people use HPV, papilloma virus infection, which can be given for children, particularly girls, because this is human papilloma virus infection predisposes girls for uterine cancer or cervical cancer. So vaccinating the young girls can prevent these infections. And there is a concept of during the COVID, we have to assess the risk of a patient getting further infections. So there is a small risk score developed by British Society. So if you are taking drugs like mycophenolate, cyclosporine, you get 1 point. And if you are on cyclophosphamide, you get 3 points. If I got a high dose of steroids, you get 3 points. And some of the biologicals gets 1 point. If you have diseases like kidney disease, lung disease, and HIV, severe diabetes, you get 1 point. So it is given, so entirely, and everything is collated and given a score. If you have 0 score, you don't have a higher risk than a normal population. If you have got 1 to 2, you got a higher risk. If you have a score of more than 3, you got a higher risk of infection. So this is how doctors assess the risk of our patients who may be at a higher risk of infections during this pandemic period. So this comes to how to protect ourselves during this current era. Social distancing. We have become popular, we are familiar with the concept of social distancing, but I feel in future with this knowledge, patients who are on immunosuppressive therapy should practice social distancing all the time rest of their lives as long as they are on immunosuppressive therapy. This might prevent an infection because every time we cough, if I cough heavily, the droplets falls within maximum of 2 meters, majority within 1 meter, maximum 2 meters. So if you stand 2 meters away from somebody who is coughing, the chance that you are exposed to the cough droplets is much less. So that is the importance of social distancing. I think this is relevant for our patients who might be taking immunosuppressive medications all the time, every day in their life. And other measures like hand washing, sanitizers, probably using a mask when you are going to a public place where there is large crowding, a large gathering, probably should become a norm. Now it is norm, and if it becomes a norm, probably it can reduce the chance of one can get an infection. But it is socially very difficult to do. If you are going to a marriage, you can't be with a mask, so very difficult to practice. But it makes sense. But particularly when you are traveling in an aeroplane or a bus or train, you can always use it. You are not worried about who is seeing you or who is not seeing you. And of course, many of our people who are taking immunomodulators are advised to stay at home and work from home and avoid social visits, avoid public transport, utilize telephonic or video consults with your doctors. People who are very severely immunosuppressed or who are in who have a score of more than 3 or 2, probably they have to be a little more strict in isolating themselves. This is called shielding. We have to shield ourselves from infections. So they are advised strictly to avoid contact with those who have symptoms suggestive of COVID or upper respiratory infection, cough, cold, running nose. So if somebody is there, better to not to go closer to them, even if it is our child. Probably ask your spouse to take care of the child rather than you rushing and carrying the baby, because you are likely to get the infection, and the infection can be much more difficult in somebody who is on immunosuppressives. They are all very difficult recommendations socially, but medically they are sound. Better not to leave home during an epidemic or a pandemic. Avoid gathering of all types, including marriages, travel, public transport, etc. Even if you are ordering home delivery from, say, Big Basket or something similar, ask them to prepay it and ask them to leave it in the door, and so that you can go and collect it, so that you avoid contact with the guy who is coming and delivering it. And this can be very socially isolating. So keep in touch with your friends, relatives, and friends by phone and social media. And contact your doctors, preferably through video consult, unless it is an emergency. And practice frequent hand washing and make sure that the visitors coming home also practice social distancing and hand washing. And anyone living with you should practice social distancing as per government guidelines. That's very important. And if they go out, they have to wash their hands and use hand sanitizers. And they should also maintain social distance. And it's pretty tough recommendations, but it could be useful during a pandemic. So, ladies and gentlemen, this is my last slide. Infections are a major cause of morbidity, and it can cause loss of work, and it can make you uncomfortable, and very rarely it can increase the risk of mortality as well. And there are multiple causes to why one gets infection. There are many patients who are immunosuppressed, they never get infection. Some people are more prone. So it's multifactorial. What comorbid disease you have. If you are a diabetic and you have rheumatoid arthritis, or you have scleroderma and you are on immunosuppressive, you are more likely to develop infections compared to a young person, a female or a male who don't have any other illness. A 25-year-old person who is on immunosuppressive is less likely to get infection compared to a 60-year-old person who is on immunosuppressive. So the cause for infection is always multifactorial. Prevention is better than cure. Infection prevention is both physicians and patients' responsibility. Doctors have a huge responsibility. As a doctors, we are concerned that our patients should not get major infections. We always try to help them on that count. And it is also patients' responsibility to practice all these things which I have told, particularly during a pandemic. And but having said that, we have to take the fear away. And every day you see the news, it can be very scary. And every time we go out, everybody sees somebody coming closer to you, it might be very scary for you. So that we have to take the fear away, but confidently practice the preventive measures. Use a glove, use a mask, and use hand sanitizers, and maintain social distance, and carry on with life. And seek medical advice as soon as you suspect infection. If you feel that you got an infection and if you are not feeling well, don't wait till long, because the longer it takes before you take an antibiotic for a serious infection, it can determine whether people get hospitalized or not. So, for example, if I get a pneumonia today, I feel unwell today, and if I get the first antibiotic before today night, I'm very likely that I may not end up in a hospital. I might probably manage at home. But if I delay for 2 days, I might become sick and I might end up in a hospitalization, if unlucky, even in an intensive care unit. So it is very important to promptly seek medical advice. Even if your doctor is not available, go to a nearby hospital, meet a good physician. And don't forget our humble vitamin D and vitamin C. Vitamin D can have a good immune modulating property, and adequate vitamin D level is shown to protect against infections. So make sure that you take adequate vitamin D. Discuss with your doctor about vitamin D. If you are not taking it, take it. And also vitamin C can be very good antiviral therapy. So taking a good dose of vitamin C, if you have an early infection, can be useful. May not be curative always, but can be useful, and it's very simple, cheap, easy, and safe. And simple measures may be more effective than vaccines and more expensive measures. So simple hand washing is more, or a sanitizer may be more useful than taking antiviral drugs in these COVID infections. So, ladies and gentlemen, I wish you all a safe future, particularly during this pandemic period. I am open for discussions and question answers. Thank you very much for patient hearing.
Thank you so much, sir, for a wonderful presentation. Actually, it has given a very different view of the injections, basically, or the immunization that we should be taking during this era. So there are a couple of questions already we have. So
Yes.
the first question is, I feel bloated and weight gain. Does Isabgol work for constipation?
If you have scleroderma, I assume that you have scleroderma.
Yes,
There are
sir.
many causes for bloating and constipation. So, isabgol can be useful if the problem is a simple constipation, and if your fiber intake is less, and taking isabgol can help. But if your bloating is due to small bowel bacterial overgrowth and decreased intestinal motility, then isabgol can cause more problems than solutions. So it is better to discuss with your doctor these issues. Maybe probably meet a gastroenterologist if you have not met, and they should be able to help you assess you properly and determine what is the cause for your symptoms and address it appropriately. If your stomach is moving slowly or is not emptying fast, you might feel full. In that case, a simple prokinetic drugs can help, like Syntapride kind of drugs can help. And if you have bacterial overgrowth, you will require cyclical antibiotics. So you have to determine the exact cause before taking isagagul. Sometimes isagagul can be useful, but if it is not useful, better to avoid it because your mechanism may be totally different and it can be counterproductive.
Right, sir. That makes a lot of sense. So next question we have is, where is science today on cure for scleroderma?
That is a $1 million question. Science is very, very far in curing any disease for that matter. We are at this moment able to cure only infections. All rest of the disease we are only managing. So probably in future we should focus more on early diagnosis, very early diagnosis and very early treatment so that people don't develop the consequences of scleroderma and other autoimmune diseases. It has been fairly successful in some autoimmune disease like rheumatoid arthritis, though there is no cure. But a rheumatoid arthritis patient, if they are diagnosed today and if they start treatment within 3 months, probably at the end of 20 years they may look normal. But we have not still reached that stage in scleroderma because it is probably the most complex and complicated autoimmune disease we face. And a lot of doctors also feel very helpless in treating, particularly after many years of scleroderma. Doctors also feel little helpless in making a huge difference. So it becomes symptom management rather than disease management most of the time. But cure is a little far away at this moment. I don't know. I don't have a crystal ball at this moment.
Right, sir. Right, sir. Okay, so moving on to the next question. The next viewer says, I want to know about tablet OFEV. OFEV. So they want to know who should take it.
I don't know what is it.
OFEV.
I don't know. This must be a commercial name. I'm sorry that I can't give you the answer. This medicine that there are in India, same medicine is available with 100 brands. Your Crocin, Calpol, Dolo, all are same. So there are 100 brand names. I'm not sure what drug it is.
OFEV is nintedanib.
Nintedanib. Okay. Nintedanib is for it is a drug which is approved for idiopathic lung fibrosis and also some patients who have more fibrotic type of interstitial lung disease. That means the scarring is more than inflammation. When there is an early stage, when there is inflammation, mycophenolate and cyclophosphamide, rituximab, tocilizumab, this kind of an immune modulating drugs are used. But when there is a scarring can lead to progressive loss of lung volume. In that case, nintedanib is shown to reduce the rate of slow down the rate of decline. The lung function slowly declines. We can put a prop. Nintedanib is like a prop. It reduces the rate of decline, and it is very expensive at this moment. And still, we are not sure its role, cost effectiveness for the if the 30,000-40,000 rupees a month, whether it is worth taking. Still, we don't know. We are still thinking about it, but it might reduce the progression of delay. So it may give you few more years of reasonable quality of life, but it's very expensive. And if there is an indication, it can be used in people who have lung disease, which is more fibrotic rather than due to inflammation.
Right, sir. Right. So let's move on to the next question. So there is a viewer with us who has a little problem with her wisdom tooth. Their wisdom tooth is growing on one side, and she is feeling mild pain, which is actually it's not affecting her chewing, but only when her mouth is not wide open. So should she be concerned?
Yes, wisdom tooth. See, wisdom tooth. All tooth should come out. Any tooth which is not in its place So, if you look at embryology, tooth are ectodermal. Ectodermal is something should be outside, like a hair, tooth should be outside the body, and mesoderm is inside the body. So it is in sitting in a mesodermal situation. Body tries to get rid of it, and there is a lot of inflammation. If it is not growing out, it might abut on the good tooth, and that can cause bone inflammation. So it may have to you have to meet a good dental surgeon and discuss whether you should remove it safely.
Right, sir.
Correct.
Right, sir. So, sir, next question we have is, can we take supplements to complete required diet, such as protein powder or flex oil capsules for omega requirement?
Yes. See, if in an ideal situation, we should be able to get all the nutrients from the food, and it is impossible because of the availability, and the soil quality has also come down. Not all the nutrients have everything, and sometimes you need supplementation. The basic simple supplementation is a good quality multivitamin and multimineral. You can take one tablet a day or one even alternate day. That will give you the missing nutrient. And fish oil capsule, if you are a vegetarian, you can take what is that?
Omega.
Omega 3 and omega 3. What is that? The seaweed oil. I don't know. Just I'm not getting the right word now. So you can get an oil fish. Where does fish get the omega 3? It is from the seaweed. So there are fish oil capsules which are from seaweed source, which can be vegetarian theoretically, or flax oil capsules can be useful. Fish oil capsule also, if you use it at a higher dose, that means you have to take a standard fish oil capsule, 2 or 3 capsule 2 or 3 times a day. So in a large amount, 3000 milligram to 4000 milligram of DHA and EPA can be a good anti-inflammatory drug also. It can be useful in autoimmune diseases. We advocate in some patients who cannot take immunosuppressive drugs, we can use them. So supplements can be taken. Vitamin D is an important supplement because we don't go out in sun, and many autoimmune disease patients are advised not to go out in sun. And food is not full of vitamin D. Most of the foods don't have much vitamin D, so we need to take supplementation. So these are the common supplements we should take.
Right, sir. So next question we have is, user wants to know, can we have milk and other dairy products?
Milk is a controversial area again. There are two arguments. We are all brought up with our mom saying, oh, milk is good, and milk, we get a Amul advertisement every day. India pita hai Amul milk. So milk is part of our culture. But if you go back to prehistorical time, humans domesticated cows and other animals only maybe 20-30,000 years ago. Before that, human beings never drank milk after weaning off from their mother. They had mother's milk. After that, they ate whatever their parents ate, I guess. So milk, I don't think it's an essential food, compulsory food for everybody. And 20 to 30% or maybe more, depending upon which area you live, population can be lactose intolerant. So many a times your gas, bloating, all these things, symptoms for which people take acid drugs can be due to milk product itself. So if you have lot of acid symptoms or stomach symptoms, it may be worth trying not to take milk products for 2 to 3 weeks and take it again and assess for yourself. I can't say milk is bad, but milk is not 100% required. I develop acid reflux if I take milk. I don't take, I'm happy. So I don't think I miss milk. But if somebody is fond of it and you tried stopping it and doesn't make any difference, then you can take it.
Right, sir. So
And there is also a small school of thought think that milks can promote autoimmunity. Milk allergy is also not uncommon. And some of the milk protein, casein, also can cause allergy and stomach symptoms. So it is worth giving every autoimmune disease patient, it is worth trying not to take milk products, including cheese and paneer, for at least a month or two, and decide for yourself end of the day.
right, sir. So next question we have is, if a person has already suffered from herpes zoster once, is a vaccine recommended in that case?
Yes, see, herpes zoster it can recur sometimes. So it's not like once you got a herpes zoster, you will never get it again. Herpes zoster is a chicken pox recurrence. We have people of our generation who had chicken pox as children. The virus goes and stays in the nerves permanently rest of our life. During the periods of stress, sometimes this virus comes out through the nerve. That's why it causes herpes zoster. So it can come. So even if you have had herpes zoster and there is no real contraindication for using zoster virus, but vaccine, but at this moment it is not available in India.
Okay, sir. So there is another user who wants to ask, can I do weight exercises? I have reflux symptoms and also mobility of esophagus seems on the lower side. And they take protein powder and they want to know, will it really worsen reflux issue?
The question is whether protein powders will worsen the reflex symptoms. Am I right?
So no, they want to know whether they can do weight exercises.
Weight exercises. Yes, weight exercises can do it. There is no contraindication. Probably weight exercises can be good also, because muscle mass, we all lose muscle mass as we age, and weight bearing exercise, simple, whether you can use dumbbells and do weight training, or even climbing stairs and using your some water bottle, lifting the water bottle 10 times up and down, and doing a biceps curl with your 1 liter water bottle can be very useful in keeping the muscle mass and also improving the muscle mass. A good muscle mass also improves the diabetic control if you are a diabetic, and it generally gives you good immune system. Exercise is also an important one, which I forgot totally in my presentation. I should have stressed on exercise. Exercise also is protective against infections. So exercise we should do, and there is no real need to take extra protein supplementation unless you want to become a like a muscle man or something like that. But you can get your protein from your food source itself.
Right, sir. So the vaccinations which we discussed in the presentation today, the question is regarding that. Are these vaccinations to be taken after the diagnosis of scleroderma?
Probably yes, because scleroderma patients are particularly vulnerable for lung disease. If it is a very young patient and who doesn't have any lung disease, who is not likely to go for immunosuppressive therapy, probably they can do away with it. But because lung disease is maybe 20, 30, 40% of the patients will develop lung disease at some point of time. So taking a vaccine early may be prudent.
Right, sir. So the next question is there a booster dose of pneumococcal vaccine at age 65 plus?
Yes. Pneumococcal vaccine, there are two vaccines. One is 13 valent, something called Prevnar 13, given once and once a lifetime only. Whatever age it is, once a lifetime. If you are 65 and above, people also get after 2 to 3 months of Prevnar, get one 23 valent vaccine called Pneumovax 23 or Pneumo 23. If you are 65 and above, once a lifetime is enough. If you are less than 65, say somebody is 45, what we do is give them one dose now. After giving Prevnar, after 2 to 3 months, we give Pneumovax and repeat it once again after 5 years and once again at the age of 65 years and done with it. So maximum of 3.
Sure, sir. A user wants to know, I haven't been prescribed vitamin D and C. Should I take it myself or consult my doctor?
Come again?
So a patient is not prescribed vitamin D and vitamin C yet. So they want to know, should we take it ourselves or consult the doctor first?
See, it is ideal to consult your doctor and ask for a prescription for vitamin D. Vitamin C you can take over the counter. Say somebody when if you are talking to somebody else, please mute your mic, because when she is asking a question, somebody else is talking.
I request all of you to please mute your mics because questions everybody is sending on the chat, and if still there are some questions, people can unmute their mic and ask later at the end of the session.
Yeah. So vitamin C can be purchased over the counter. You can take 1 or 2 tablets of your popular Limcy or Selin. You can take 1 or 2 tablets per day. If you have viral illness, you can take up to 6 tablets or 8 tablets a day. Sometimes more tablets you take, you may get loose motions. So if you get a loose motions, you can reduce the dosage. During an episode of infection, you can take higher dose of vitamin C. It is safe, doesn't have side effects. It is water soluble and is excreted through whatever is not required by the body. It's excreted through urine and motion. So it is safe to take. But vitamin D is stored in our body. Too much of vitamin D can be a problem. So it is better to take vitamin D under the supervision of your doctor. Sometimes every doctor gives vitamin D. You end up taking more vitamin D, and we can cause hypervitaminosis D. There's a disease called hypervitaminosis D, which can be sometimes you may end up hospitalization as well.
Right, sir.
But general recommendation is if you want to take yourself and you are not going to go to your doctor and your doctor is not accessible, 1000 units of vitamin D is available as a small capsule. 1000 units of vitamin D, almost everyone can take safely without very side effect. But if you are already on side effect, vitamin D from some other source, if you take another 1000, it may become more. So I take 1000 units of vitamin D every day. So you can take as well. But it is better to talk to your doctor because many doctors are giving vitamin D now. So if you are meeting 3 doctors, it is possible that you have 3 prescriptions by vitamin D and you might end up being overdosed.
Right, sir. So the next question is, can we take alcohol while taking MMF and sleep medications?
First, sleep medication first. Most of the sleep medications are psychoactive drugs and they definitely interact with alcohol. And alcohol plus many sleep medications can cause lot of unwanted psychological side effects. Sometimes it causes what is called as amnesia. Amnesia is you forget what you did. So you take alcohol and take a sleeping pill, and you may behave funnily in the night, and next day morning you may not remember what you have done. Sometimes you might have done something nasty, or you would have spoken unparliamentary words against your mom or dad, which you would not do otherwise. So you can cause some automatic behavior, better to avoid. And if at all you take alcohol, minimize to a small quantity, and one glass of wine is fine, one unit. But too much of alcohol is not good for autoimmune diseases per se. But I'm not against social alcohol. So if it serves a purpose socially and you feel nice talking to your friends, taking a small sip of half glass of wine, it is fine. But too much of alcohol along with the sleeping pills can be a problem. Along with MMF, there is no real contraindication for using alcohol. If you are on MMF, you can take a small dose of alcohol once in a while, social.
Right, sir. So in this COVID-19 era, where everybody is saying we need to work on our immunity, so can we take Himalaya immunity tablets?
We have a problem because immune boosters may have an effect. There is no denying that. There is something called echinacea. For some of you might have read, it's available in European countries. It's a herb from Europe and popular in Western countries. It is shown to worsen autoimmune diseases. So it is a delicate balance between overactive immune system and immunosuppression. So too much of immunostimulant drugs, like sometimes Ayurvedic doctors say will give you some immune boosting drug. We don't know. We don't have a proper studies at this moment, but in US and Europe, there is good evidence to say that some of the herbal products which are given for immune boosting. So during COVID era, a lot of people are using the echinacea herb and other stuff. It may be okay for a person who doesn't have a disease, but they have an autoimmune disease. Potentially, they can worsen lupus. It can worsen. I'm not sure about scleroderma. Definitely, there is data on lupus. So I will be a little wary to take too much of immune boosting molecules of uncertain action. We don't know how they work. It is better to take simple measures, dietary things, take our good kashayam or which like ginger, garlic, that kind of a thing. One garlic, you can crush it and take it along with your food. This type of simple things should be okay. But anything more than it contains herb, there could be a potential risk, which we don't know at this moment. So it may be okay for some, and it may worsen your disease in some. So I would not recommend strongly, and you have to take it at your own risk.
Sure, sir. So the next patient wants to know, you have talked about vegetables and fruits in your presentation, and
Yes.
the person is already taking natural diet. He's experimenting with that. So they want to know what would you recommend here if we talk about a natural diet.
Yeah. Basically, what I have showed in the presentation as anti-inflammatory drug diet, that is what is the standard recommendation. I try to eat like this. I don't know. You can see the screen. I don't know whether my screen is still seen. Vegetables, more vegetables. 50 to 60% of your plates can be vegetable. All vegetable. Make it colorful. Different colors give you different polyphenols, different nutrients which may have immune boosting effect. If you take cabbage, one day you take white cabbage, next week you take pink color cabbage, because that pink color gives you a different chemical which may have a immune boosting or good effect on the autoimmune disease per se. And take a different, you don't take mangoes only. One day you take mango, one day you take another fruit, another day another fruit. So the different colored fruit, different colored vegetables have different useful effects. And less fruits, more vegetables. That is one thing. Less simple sugar, less salt, tea and green tea, omega-3 fatty acids, spice. You can spice up your, within the limit of your stomach tolerance, you can have turmeric, garlic, and cinnamon, and what else? Garlic, etc. And chew your food well. That is also an important step. And eat slowly, eat mindfully, and don't gulp. Eat, chew well. That makes a huge difference to your digestion. And there are some school of thought of going vegan, stopping animal protein. That is, if you are doing that, you have to make sure that you are nutritionally not compromised, so that you have to have vitamin B12 supplement and other things. That also worth trying. If you are experimenting, it's worth trying going vegan for say 3 months and see whether it makes a difference. If you feel good, stick to it. If you don't feel good, it doesn't make difference. Occasional non-vegetarian is okay.
Right, sir. So the other patient wants to know that they are not sure if they have taken pneumococcal vaccine before. So will there be any serious harm if they take it again?
No. If you are not sure at all, then you can ask your doctor to initiate the program. Take the 13-valent first, and after 3-4 months, you take the second one. 23-valent, and depending on if you are 60 and above, that may be enough. If you are younger than that, you may require a booster dose of only the 23, not the 13.
Right, sir. So the another patient wants to know, can going out in sun causes fear of a disease?
It can, particularly in a disease called lupus, or systemic lupus erythematosus, which is very closely related to scleroderma. So we all consider scleroderma, lupus, Sjogren, dermatomyositis as sister diseases. They have some common pathway, and sometimes they can overlap. So if you have a skin disease, if you are known to have rashes when you went out in sun, it is better to avoid direct sun exposure, prolonged sun exposure, particularly like going in a beach, etc. And in a vulnerable patient, the sun-induced damage to the skin can act as a booster for autoimmune disease. Particularly, it is true for lupus. I'm not sure 100% it can translate for scleroderma, but for a lupus patient, sun-induced burn can lead to a lot of skin damage in the skin that can start an autoimmune process. Many patients become very sick after that, may end up with serious side effects, and they may end up hospitalizing. So it is better to avoid direct sun exposure for a prolonged period for most of the autoimmune diseases. Scleroderma, maybe a short-term exposure should be okay, but don't go out in a beach in a shorts and a minimum dress. That I would advise strongly against.
Sure, sir. So another question is from a Sjogren's patient. So they are saying that they are going out once a week to get the basic grocery and other stuff. So what are their chances of getting infected in today's situation in spite of taking all the precautions?
Yeah, it depends on what drugs you are in. If you are not on any immunosuppressive type of medications, your risk is same as my risk and age appropriate risk. So we have to take all the precautions. Still, we may be at a risk of developing a disease. A small risk, population risk, I will put it there, like that. But it's same risk as your brother and sister. But if you are on an immunosuppressive drug, you are not advised not to go out for a shopping, particularly when there is a mad crowd trying to buy and social distancing is not maintained. It is better to avoid during this period.
Sure, sir.
If there is lot of viral fevers, flu running in the community, during that time, make sure that somebody else does the shopping for you. You can do online shopping. You can give a list to your hubby or children, and they can get the groceries for you.
Right, sir. So, sir, is the treatment protocol for COVID-19 different for scleroderma patients?
No. At this moment, there is no definite treatment for COVID-19. If I get and you get, the treatment would be probably the same, and it is symptomatic treatment, and maintaining the vital functions. And very empirically, they are giving some antiviral drugs, and nobody knows which is the drug which is going to work and make a difference. Only thing is, people have to be observed closely for who is going to develop more severe form of COVID. That patients might require totally different group. Sometimes immunosuppressive drugs are used to treat severe respiratory symptoms. It may sound counterintuitive, but we use immunosuppressives to treat severe forms of COVID and SARS type of infections.
Right, sir. So the next question is, how effective is rituximab for scleroderma?
Yes, rituximab is a new drug. It is not universally effective for all the patients with scleroderma. It's not like a curative drug or a wonderful drug. But if you have lung disease, which is not responding very well to mycophenolate or MMF, or cyclophosphamide we cannot give cyclophosphamide for various reasons, or you have given already and patient is progressing. And rituximab has shown promising results in arresting the progression of lung disease. So it can be useful, but it's not like a standard drug which could be given for everybody. Still not a first line drug.
Right, sir. Moving forward, it has been said that COVID would be around for another 6 months or maybe
Yes.
more. So, do you recommend us to not move out of our homes at all? And how long should we be practicing this?
We don't know. See, we are in uncertain periods. Probably another 3 to 6 months until the community spread is stopped. I mean, the number of new cases have become less, and people say that okay, it is there in the community. Lot of people have been affected with the community, so not many transmission is happening. Then probably we can move out without much fear. That might take another 6 months or so. So it is better to stay safe. Not that you should be confined to a room or bed. You can go for a small walk in your colony. Maintain a social distance, but I would avoid you to avoid unnecessary travel, like going to a marriage, unless it is your own children's marriage or very close marriage. You can skip. You can send somebody from home as your representative, and avoid public transport. And to a certain extent, try to protect. Again, I don't know how much is fear, how much is real. We don't know at this moment, and it makes sense to be careful for the next 6 months. Social isolation, social distancing is better. If possible, do online consultations unless you have to see your doctor for any other strong indications.
Sir, there's a question when we are talking about online consultations. That we can do, but how about blood test and other tests which we have to do?
Blood test, if I have seen somebody and if I want them to come after 3 months, we would have asked for a blood test in your previous prescription. That blood test can be done in a lab nearby. So you can ask the lab to come for a home collection. And of course, that is again a risk. Somebody is coming in to our home. But that small risk we have to take. That person has to use a hand sanitizer before coming into the house. He should be wearing a mask. You should be wearing a mask. After he takes the blood, anyway, that during the taking the blood, they will use sterile spirit anyway. So, and if he is coughing, that boy is coughing who is coming to collect the blood, probably ask him not to come. It's difficult. I understand the dilemma. So it's very complex. It's unusual situation which is alien to all of us now. We can do the blood test. What our patients are doing is they are doing the blood test like this and sending the blood test by WhatsApp. We are seeing the blood test and trying to see. They try to show whatever they want to show, their hands and other stuff, and we try to interpret. It is never complete, never is an alternative to physical examination, but that's the best alternative we have.
Right, so that's a very good advisory actually on the online appointments and the blood test. So, sir, another patient wants to know that when they try to do exercises, they get pain in their sole feet. So, what could be the reason for that?
Can be multiple reasons. Depends depending upon your age and your weight. The commonest cause is what is called as a plantar fasciitis or a heel pain, which is due to some strain on the ligaments which attach to the bone. It can happen after a sudden change in footwear. If you have done unusual walking with a uncomfortable footwear, it can start. Other causes can be if you don't have much flesh in your sole. Say, assume that this is a sole. There is a flesh here. If you don't have much flesh, when you walk, you start pressing on the bones, and that can be painful. So, simple change in footwear, comfortable footwear, a soft slippers like a microcellular rubber slipper or a microcellular something called MCP slippers, simple Hawaii slippers or a sports shoe can help you to walk better. If you're still not better, meet a physiotherapist. They can help you with a lot of exercises to stretch your foot muscles, strengthen your foot muscles. Still not better, see your doctor.
Sure, sir. So, the next patient has ILD with scleroderma, and since past couple of weeks they are getting fever, 99.9, and ESR is 78. They want to know, is there any infection? Because they have taken all the vaccination already.
Yeah, unfortunately, vaccines cannot prevent all the infections. Vaccines actually can prevent only two major infections. There are hundreds of causes of infection. So, vaccination will not prevent us from getting an infection by a bacteria which is not covered by the vaccine. So, there are so many viruses, even including corona, we don't have a virus. If you have a fever which is increasing, if you are feeling unwell, it's better to contact the doctor, contact your physician so that he might advise you an antibiotic promptly. If it's going on for 15-20 days, probably it is not an active infection. If it is recent onset, it is more likely to be infection. If you are having a mild cough, mild feverish feeling for 1 month, it is unlikely to be infection. Probably it is due to the disease slightly going up. You may need to titrate your medications.
Right, sir. So, the another user, the next patient was on HCQS. In fact, she still is. So, when the supply was less, she was taking them twice a week till now. But yesterday she restocked. So, she is asking, can she start continuing her earlier dose, or should she eventually increase the dosage gradually?
Yeah, better to increase the dose to a daily dose. Better.
Okay, sir. Okay, sir. So,
for a short period, you can take once a week or twice a week, but long-term basis, daily dosage is better.
Right, sir. Actually, she was taking twice a week when the supply was less. Her doctor asked.
I know. Yeah, she can resume her regular dosage.
Right, sir. The another patient wants to know they have red spots in the face. Can something be done about them?
Red spots. Red spots are due to the increase in the capillary density. Unfortunately, there is no specific drug treatment. I think you have to rely on cosmetic and camouflage. We can use some creams and other things which can reduce the to make it look better. Your cosmetologist should be able to advise you on something called camouflage. You can camouflage your the red dots can make it look less prominent or less obvious. I don't think there is any medicines which can make it better.
Right, sir. So we have an RA patient and she wants to know, is there any specific advice for RA patients in present era of COVID-19?
Not really. It's very similar to what I have already told you. And if you are on immunosuppressive medicines or immunomodulating medicines like methotrexate or leflunomide, you have to practice the social distancing, social isolation, and take vaccines. Same, very similar. No specific advice for rheumatoid arthritis.
Right, sir. So, okay. So the patient is a scleroderma patient with ILD. They want to know that how safe is it to walk in the building compound in present scenario?
If you are maintaining a social distance, I think we can't be at home all the time. I think we have to be little brave and either you go to a terrace or you go to but avoid group walking. We all have a friends. We walk with 10 friends, 15 or 5 friends, chit chatting. That you avoid and maintain a distance between at least 3 meters between two people who are walking. So you should go. I think it's because unless there is a COVID in your building or apartments, you could go for it. Wearing a mask and maintaining a social distance. I think we should start.
Sure, sir. So the next question is there any safe PPI which can be recommended to take every day?
Come again.
Sir, is there any safe PPI medicine which can be recommended to take every day?
Yeah. See, many scleroderma patients who have severe acid reflux, I think they can't totally do away with PPI. That is the unfortunate part. This is one disease where we are not able to totally stop PPI. All PPI are same. There is no safer PPI. So if you are able to restrict it to once a day and manage your minor symptoms with physical measures like changing the eating habits, changing the diet, see which food. Sometimes you might find that eating certain type of masala increases, biryani will increase your acidity. So if you have identified a particular food, you better to avoid them and have your dinner by 7:30, sleep after 10:30. Doing all these small measures, you may be able to reduce your PPI. So if you are on 40 milligram of Pantodac or pantoprazole, you may be able to reduce to 20 milligram, provided your acid reflex allows it. And if you are really doing well with minimum drugs, you can ask your doctor to say whether you can be better with ranitidine kind of drugs, which may be slightly less acid suppressing. If your symptoms allow, give it a break once in a while. Maybe 2 days a week you don't take. You have to experiment a little bit with the PPI, but most patients who have severe acid reflux probably they require it at least once a day.
Right, sir. So there's another question on the red spots. When there are red spots, is it a sign of inflammation?
It's not inflammation. It is due to this. There are 2-3 components in scleroderma. One is autoimmunity and inflammation. Second component is what is called as a vasculopathy. Third component is fibrosis. So this is the combination interplay of three things which result in the ultimate the picture of scleroderma. This red spots in the face indicate vasculopathy. It is the capillaries become dilated. Some capillaries become smaller, or some capillaries die off, and the rest of the capillaries try to compensate it become bigger. So this process causes red spots in the face. Sometimes something can happen in the stomach, which can cause sometimes gastrointestinal bleeding, and it's the same thing which causes Raynaud's phenomena and finger nail changes also.
Right, sir. So there is another question about a particular tablet. This patient is having mycophenolate mofetil. He was taking that, but due to the lockdown, he is not getting this tablet. He is getting mycophenolate acid delayed 360 mg. So they want to know whether they can take this tablet or should they wait for their original tablet to come.
No. You should not stop it particularly. For beyond 1 or 2 days, better not to stop it. Mycophenolate has got two forms. One is mycophenolate mofetil, which is 500 milligram tablet. Then mycophenolate sodium, which is 360 milligram tablet. This 500 and 360 are supposed to be equivalent. So if you are not getting that 500, instead of that 500, you can take the 360.
Right, sir. Right.
So this mycophenolate sodium 360 is equal to mycophenolate mofetil 500. So if you are taking 500 milligram tablet, 4 tablets, then you have to, the replacement will be 360 milligram tablets, 4 tablets.
Right, sir. So the next patient is an ILD patient on immunosuppressants. They have been having problem of feet when they sit or stand for long. So they took Diator for 10 days, but it isn't helping much. So is there any advice for them?
Difficult to say. There are multiple causes again. If they are obese, they are fat, they are obese, that can itself can cause what we call as the dependent edema. And one of the cause for leg swelling can be varicose veins. Somebody has to look at their legs for varicose veins. And another cause could be kidney disease. If somebody is leaking protein from the kidney, they can cause swelling. If they have heart disease, they can have swelling. And another important cause for swelling is tablets. If you are on a tablet called nifedipine or Nicardia retard, that kind of a tablet for your Raynaud's phenomena, they can also cause swelling. Very rarely, mycophenolate also can cause swelling. So you have to determine what is the cause for swelling and act upon. So you have to discuss. You can ask the doctor whether it can be due to any one of these. You can stimulate your doctor to think about the drugs.
Right, sir. Right, sir. So, I guess the last question which we have got on chat is here. So, the person wants to know whether the PPI helps in food reflux or acid reflux. So, I'm actually not sure about the question.
Yeah. See, what is happening is in scleroderma patients, it is acid reflux or a gastrointestinal esophageal reflux disease is a common problem in the community, and a lot of people have it. In scleroderma patient, the lower esophageal sphincter, when the food crosses into the stomach, when the stomach is digesting the food, the esophageal sphincter has to close, so that the food which is there in the stomach, which is getting digested, has to only go to the duodenum and small intestine and not come up. But due to scleroderma, there's fibrosis and muscle weakness and defective motility, there's a lower esophageal sphincter tone pressure comes down. It allows the food along with its acid. It is not the acid alone. The moment food is there, the acid is there, acid and food gets mixed up. Acid breaks up the protein, helps in digestion, helps in absorption of nutrients, etc. It's the entire food bolus comes up into the esophagus, which are not designed to take this acid load. Stomach is designed to take the acid load. It can be pH with a very low acidity. It can be very comfortable stomach tissue, but esophageal tissue is not comfortable. That's why you start getting what is called as a heartburn. It can come up to the throat and sometimes burn your throat, and sometimes it can come into the mouth. So this is called gastroesophageal reflux disease. And it is not the acid. It's called acid because acid is a cause for that burning sensation, but it's actually the food along with the acid coming up. Right,
sir. So these were the questions which we got on chat. So I guess I request everybody, a few people raise their hands during the conversation. So in case you still have any more questions, please unmute yourself and ask the questions. Otherwise, we plan to end the session in next 5 minutes. Any more questions anybody is having? Sir,
Thank you so much, doctor.
Yeah, welcome, sir.
Sir, we have got a lot of thank you on the chat, and people are happy that you clarified a lot of doubts besides the infection for which we actually arranged this webinar.
You're welcome. It's my pleasure to be amongst with you. And scleroderma is a disease which sometimes is some of the diseases which we feel inadequate, because some of the diseases we feel like kings. When you treat rheumatoid arthritis, I feel very confident. I know that I can make them better like this. But scleroderma is always challenges us, and I have learned a lot from my own patients. And I always am for the patients, because we know that's a difficult disease. You are managing a very difficult disease, and we have to keep you people or person rather than a patient all the time.
My last question, doctor. I guess you are based out from Bangalore, but if I have to reach out in future, how do I reach out?
Now the online consultations are always available, and I can share the details with Nanitu. But it's better to meet your local doctor. But in case you have anything to discuss, you can.
Okay, doctor. Thank you so much.
Doctor, is it possible to get the slides of your presentation?
Copy of the whole thing.
I will send it to Mrs. Neetu. She will hopefully she will share it with all of you. I'll send. I have no problem with the slides. I'll
Thank
send
you
it.
very much.
Right, sir. I'll share it with everybody after today's presentation.
Yes.
Right, sir. Thank you so much for today's session, and I thank
Okay,
everybody for joining in today.
Thank you, doctor.
Okay. Bye bye. Bye bye.
Bye bye. Thank you, doctor.
Thank you.
Welcome.